This 6-year-old girl scared a millionaire when she said her sister was in their house that was on fire. But what's most shocking is when the millionaire went inside and smelled burnt flesh, and what he found will shock you. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The sun began to set over a small town in the Midwest, painting the clapboard houses in hues of gold. The usual evening quiet was shattered by the desperate cries of a little girl running barefoot down Elm Street, her floral dress torn and smudged with soot. "Help! Please! Someone help me!" yelled Jenny, only 6 years old, tears carving clean paths down her smoke-stained face. Her small, scraped feet barely touched the ground as she ran in desperation, seeking help to save her sister. On Main Street, a black Cadillac Escalade crept along. In the back seat, Theodore Ted Bergstrom, 58, absently reviewed documents about his latest meeting at the mining company. His austere face, etched with decades of tough business decisions, betrayed no emotion as he analyzed the numbers that would determine the future of dozens of employees. The impact was sudden. Jenny tripped and fell right in front of the vehicle. The driver slammed on the brakes, throwing Ted forward. Before he could voice his irritation, the Escalade door was yanked open by the little girl, who clung to his leg in desperation. "Sir, please! My house is on fire! My sister's inside!" Jenny begged, her big eyes overflowing with tears. Something in the child's voice pierced the armor Ted had built over the years. Without a second thought, he got out of the car and followed the girl down a narrow alley. The smell of smoke grew stronger with each step, and soon they arrived at a small wood-frame house partially engulfed in flames. Neighbors stood helplessly by. Flames danced menacingly, licking at the walls of the humble dwelling. Inside, the crackling of wood and the deafening roar of the fire consuming everything in its path could be heard. "Ashley, my sister!" Jenny screamed, trying to run towards the burning house, but a neighbor held her back. Ted glanced at his Italian suit, worth $3,000, his bespoke shoes, the gold watch on his wrist. Gifts he had given himself to celebrate each major deal closed. In a matter of seconds, he made a decision that would forever change not only his life, but that of everyone around him. Ignoring the shouted warnings of the onlookers, he ran into the burning house. The thick smoke and suffocating heat made it almost impossible to breathe. His eyes burned as he navigated the interior of the small residence. "Ashley!" he shouted, his voice hoarse from the smoke. A faint groan caught his attention. Near a window, he found a teenager unconscious. Ashley, 15, had severe burns on her right arm and leg. Without hesitation, Ted scooped her up in his arms, smelling burnt flesh as his own suit began to catch fire. The way back seemed endless. The roof began to collapse behind him, and each breath was a battle against the toxic smoke. The pain in his arm was searing, but he couldn't stop. Not now. When he finally emerged, he was greeted by shouts of relief and applause from the small crowd that had gathered. Jenny ran to them, hugging her unconscious sister as paramedics, who had just arrived, rushed to provide first aid. Ted watched the scene as if in a dream, his burned arm throbbing, his breathing still labored. For the first time in years, something beyond numbers and deals had touched his heart. Jenny's crying, clinging to her sister's hand while the paramedics attended to her, awakened long-buried memories of his own childhood. At the hospital where they were taken, while a doctor treated his burn, Ted learned that the girls were orphans. Their mother, Connie, had mysteriously disappeared 6 months earlier, leaving them in the care of neighbors. They survived on odd jobs and the kindness of strangers. Watching the two sisters through the hospital room window, Ashley sedated and covered in bandages, Jenny asleep in a chair next to the bed, still clutching her sister's hand. Ted felt something he hadn't experienced since he was a poor boy in rural Illinois: compassion. That night, as he drove back to his lonely mansion in the upscale part of town, the words of his late mother echoed in his mind. "Son, money buys comfort, but it doesn't buy peace of mind." For the first time in decades, he was beginning to understand the true meaning of those words. In the solitude of his office, surrounded by awards and certificates attesting to his business success, Ted made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew him. He would not abandon those girls to their fate. Not after what he had witnessed. What he didn't know, as he made that silent promise, was that decision would lead him to confront secrets buried for years, and that the two little orphans would bring to light truths he had fought so hard to forget. The Bergstrom mansion, an imposing structure high above the town, was in a flurry of activity that morning. Agatha, the 63-year-old housekeeper who had dedicated a quarter of a century of her life to caring for the house, supervised the preparation of 2 guest rooms with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. In her 25 years of service, she had never seen Ted make such an impulsive decision as taking in 2 unknown girls. "I want everything perfect," she ordered the staff, personally adjusting the silk curtains in the rooms. Mr. Bergstrom should arrive with the girls any moment. At the hospital, Ted was fighting a bureaucratic battle to obtain temporary custody of the sisters. His lawyer, Gerald "Jerry" Mendez, a 70-year-old who had been with him since the beginning of his career, didn't hide his concern. "Ted, are you sure about this? Your divorce from Denise was barely finalized. The local press is still gossiping about the scandal. And now you want to bring 2 unknown girls into your home." Ted, still with his arm bandaged from the burn, watched through the hospital window. Ashley, now conscious but still very weak, spoke in whispers with her younger sister. There was something in that scene that touched him deeply, although he couldn't explain exactly what. "Jerry, for the first time in a long time, I'm sure of something," he replied without taking his eyes off the girls. "They have no one. And he paused thoughtfully. "I don't have anyone either." News of Ted's decision spread quickly through the small town. In a community where everyone knew each other, the unexpected gesture of the businessman, known for his coldness in business, caused an instant buzz. At the Coffee Klatch, a traditional town meeting place, tongues were wagging. "Did you hear? Bergstrom is taking Connie's daughters to the mansion," commented Zelda, owner of the coffee shop, while serving fresh donuts to the morning customers. "That man who never said good morning to anyone." The news also reached the ears of Ben, Ted's only son, in his penthouse apartment in Chicago. At 30, Ben had never worked a day in his life, living off his father's generous allowances and the inheritance left by his mother, Ted's first wife. "What do you mean he's taking in 2 girls?" he shouted on the phone to his girlfriend, Melissa. "My dad's completely lost it. I need to get back to that small town urgently." At the hospital, Jenny held Ted's hand tightly while the social worker explained the procedures for temporary custody. The little girl, who just a few days ago saw him only as the rich guy from the mining company, now looked at him with a mixture of admiration and hope. "Mr. Bergstrom," she whispered, tugging slightly at his sleeve, "are we really going to live in a castle?" He couldn't help but smile, the first genuine one in years. "It's not exactly a castle, sweetie. It's just a big house." "But does it have a garden?" Her eyes sparkled. "Can we plant flowers there? Mom always said that flowers remind us that there's beauty even on sad days." The mention of her missing mother made Ted feel a pang in his chest. Connie. Why did that? Name sound vaguely familiar? He pushed the thought aside, concentrating on the present. "We can plant as many flowers as you want," he promised. Ashley, from her hospital bed, watched the interaction with an enigmatic look. At 15, she had already learned that the kindness of others usually came with a price. Her burn still ached intensely, but there was a deeper pain in her eyes. Something that went beyond the physical wounds. The arrival at the mansion was a moment of silent contemplation. While Jenny ran excitedly through the hallways, marveling at every detail, Ashley remained silent, supported in a wheelchair due to the burns on her leg. Agatha greeted them with a maternal smile, but her perceptive eyes didn't fail to notice the teenager's reserved behavior. In her many years as a housekeeper, she had developed a sixth sense for family secrets. "Come, I'll show you your rooms," she said gently, leading them down the main hallway. The room prepared for Jenny was a pastel dream, with an antique dollhouse that had belonged to Ted's late mother. The girl's eyes filled with tears when she saw on the bed a rag doll very similar to the ones her mother used to make. "I found it in a craft store downtown," Agatha explained. "The saleswoman said it was the work of a local artisan." "It's Mom's!" exclaimed Jenny, hugging the doll. "She always did the same embroidery on the dress, look." Ted, who was watching the scene from the door, felt something strange when he heard that. Why did the mention of that artisan bother him so much? Why did he have the feeling that he was forgetting something important? The moment was interrupted by the abrupt arrival of Ben, who burst into the mansion like a storm. His face was red with anger, and the smell of alcohol on his breath betrayed that he had started drinking on the plane. "What the hell is this, Dad?" he thundered, completely ignoring the presence of the girls. "You lose your mind after the divorce and decide to play the Good Samaritan." Ted, who rarely lost his composure, felt his blood boil. "In my office. Now," he ordered in a tone that brooked no argument. As father and son headed to the office, Ashley watched everything with an increasingly troubled look. Her hands trembled slightly, and her face had paled even more. "Are you all right, dear?" asked Agatha, noticing her unease. "Yes," she replied automatically, but her eyes said otherwise. "I just need to rest a little." In the office, the argument between father and son escalated rapidly. "You can't just bring two strangers into our house," Ben shouted. "What if they're after your money? What if their mother shows up later demanding a fortune?" "Enough," Ted's voice cut through the air like a knife. "You've never cared about this house or this family. You live in Chicago, blowing the money I worked so hard to earn. You have no right to question my decisions." "Don't I?" Ben laughed bitterly. "And who's going to inherit the problems you're bringing into the house? Me, your only son? Or have you forgotten that too?" Outside the office, Jenny played happily with her rag doll, oblivious to the storm brewing. But Ashley, in her room, hugged her knees tightly, her burns throbbing painfully as memories she was desperately trying to suppress began to emerge. Agatha, arranging some belongings salvaged from the fire, found a partially charred photograph that made her heart stop for a moment. In the image, already faded by time, a young and beautiful woman smiled next to a man she knew very well. A Ted Bergstrom, 15 years younger, at a company party. The housekeeper looked at the photo and then at the closed office door where the argument continued. How many secrets did that mansion still hold? And why had Ted denied knowing Connie when there was clearly some history between them? The sun began to set over the small town, painting the sky with shades of orange and red. In the Bergstrom mansion, as the night approached, each of the inhabitants carried their own shadows, their own fears. And that would be just the first of many nights in which the past and the present would intertwine in ways that no one could have predicted. The first night in the Bergstrom mansion was marked by nightmares. Jenny's screams echoed through the old hallways around 3 in the morning, prompting Agatha to run immediately to her room. The little girl was sitting on the bed, trembling, her face bathed in tears. "It was him again," she sobbed, clutching the rag doll. "The man who was arguing with Mom." Agatha sat on the edge of the bed, hugging the girl. "What man, honey? Can you remember what he looked like?" Jenny closed her eyes tightly, as if trying to capture the fleeting image from the dream. "I can't see his face, but I remember the watch, a big gold watch, shining in the dark." The housekeeper felt a chill run down her spine. The watch described by Jenny was identical to the one Ted always wore, a unique piece that had belonged to his father. But before she could process that information, she noticed Ted standing in the doorway of the room, observing the scene with an indecisive expression. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse with sleep. On his wrist, the gold watch gleamed under the dim light of the lamp. Jenny, upon seeing him, hid even further in Agatha's arms. It was the first time she'd shown fear of Ted since she met him. "It was just a nightmare," Agatha replied quickly, noticing the girl's discomfort. "It's all right now, isn't it, honey?" In the next room, Ashley remained awake, sitting in her wheelchair by the window. The burns on her leg and arm ached, but it wasn't the physical pain that kept her awake. Her eyes, fixed on the dark garden, seemed to see something beyond the night. In the next morning, breakfast was a tense affair. Ben, who had decided to stay at the mansion to protect the family's interests, as he put it, made a point of showing his displeasure with the situation. "So, girls," he said with false sweetness as he cut his toast, "why exactly did your house burn down? Did someone leave something on? Or maybe—" "Ben!" Ted interrupted him sharply. "That's enough." Ashley, who had barely touched her food, excused herself and left the table abruptly, her hands trembling as she maneuvered her wheelchair. Jenny followed her with worried eyes, but remained seated, playing distractedly with her scrambled eggs. "We need to talk about school." Ted changed the subject, addressing the younger girl. "Agatha has already arranged your enrollment at St. Clair's School. It's the best in town." Jenny's eyes lit up momentarily. "Can I take my doll?" "Not to school, honey," Agatha replied gently, "but she'll be waiting for you when you get back, along with all the other dolls your mom made." The mention of the dolls made Ted frown. A distant memory tried to surface in his mind, something about rag dolls at a craft fair, a conversation. But the memory slipped away like water through his fingers. After breakfast, while Agatha helped Jenny get ready for her first day at her new school, an unexpected visitor arrived at the mansion. Maureen O'Malley, an investigative journalist from the local paper, stood at the front gate, her notepad in hand. "Mr. Bergstrom," she called out as Ted left for his office at the mining company, "can we talk about Connie Silver?" The name hit Ted like a punch to the gut. Why did that name cause him so much unease? "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied curtly, getting into his Escalade. "Don't you?" Maureen insisted, approaching the car. "It's interesting because I have records here that show she worked as a housekeeper at your mansion a few years ago. She was fired suddenly, around the same time the first complaints arose about your mining company contaminating the river." Ted, who felt a drop of cold sweat trickle down his neck. "I don't remember every employee who's ever worked here," he replied, signaling the driver to leave. But Maureen wouldn't give up easily. At 45, she was known for her persistence in uncovering the town's darkest secrets. She had been the one to first report the environmental problems caused by Ted's mining company, although she had never obtained concrete proof. Inside the mansion, Agatha watched the scene from the kitchen window, her mind working quickly. The photograph she had found among the girl's belongings burned in her conscience. Should she show the image to someone? Her reflections were interrupted by a noise coming from Ashley's room. Upon entering, she found the teenager lying near the bed, trying to reach something under the furniture. "Goodness gracious, child," she exclaimed, rushing to help her. "You can't exert yourself like that. Your burns are still healing." "Sorry," murmured Ashley, but her eyes remained fixed on something under the bed. When Agatha bent down to see what it was, she found a small golden key. "It's just an old key," said the housekeeper, handing the object to the girl. But the way Ashley grabbed the key, as if her life depended on it, didn't go unnoticed. At school, Jenny faced her own challenges. The new uniform and expensive school supplies made her feel out of place among the other children. all daughters of the town's wealthiest families. "Is it true your house burned down?" asked a girl during recess. "My mom said you were really poor and that you're now living for free in Mr. Bergstrom's house." Jenny hugged her knees, missing her rag doll. It was then that she noticed an elderly woman watching her through the school fence. It was Olivia, the former mining company employee who now sold herbs at the farmer's market. Her eyes met the girl's with a disturbing intensity. At the mining company office, Ted tried to focus on his papers, but his mind kept returning to Maureen's words. Why couldn't he clearly remember Connie? And why did he have the feeling that he was forgetting something important? His partner and best friend, Norbert "Norb" Mendez, 60, entered the room without knocking, as he always did. "Ted, we need to talk about that new exploration area. The tests indicated..." But Ted wasn't listening. His eyes had fixed on an old photograph framed on the wall, a record of the mining company's 15th anniversary party. In the image, partially hidden among other employees, was a woman he now recognized, Connie. The sound of breaking glass brought him back to the present. Norb had accidentally knocked over a glass of water, but his reaction seemed exaggerated for such a small incident. "Are you all right?" asked Ted, noticing how his friend had paled. Sure, replied Norb quickly, but his eyes were fixed on the same photograph Ted had been observing moments before. Back at the mansion in the late afternoon, Ted found Ben rummaging through his private office. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice filled with anger. "Looking for answers," replied his son, holding some old documents. "And you know what I found? That woman, the girl's mother, she didn't just disappear. She made serious accusations against the mining company before she vanished. Too much of a coincidence, don't you think, Dad?" Before Ted could answer, a shrill scream cut through the air. It was Jenny, having another one of her nightmares. But this time, her words froze the blood of everyone who heard them. "Don't hurt my mom. Please don't hurt her. I saw your watch. I know who you are." In the next room, Ashley held the small golden key tightly, silent tears streaming down her face. And downstairs, Agatha looked once again at the charred photograph, finally making her decision. The truth, she knew, couldn't remain buried for much longer. Not when the nightmares of a child were beginning to reveal secrets that had been hidden in the shadows of the Bergstrom mansion for so long. The news spread through the small town like wildfire. Ted Bergstrom, the powerful owner of the mining company, had hired the best doctors in the country to treat Ashley's burns. A whole team of specialists arrived in town one Wednesday morning, transforming the local hospital into a makeshift center of excellence. Agatha watched the preparations for Ashley's first procedure with a mixture of admiration and concern. The photograph she had found weighed in her pocket like lead. After much reflection, she decided to seek answers before revealing it to anyone. "Mrs. Agatha," Jenny's gentle voice brought her back to the present. The girl held her rag doll tightly. "Is Ashley going to be okay?" The housekeeper hugged the little girl, feeling her heart clench. "Yes, honey, the doctors are going to take very good care of her." Across the hall from the hospital, Ted spoke in a low voice with Dr. Robert "Bob" Almeida, a renowned plastic surgeon from New York City. "I want the best treatments regardless of the cost," insisted the businessman. "Mr. Bergstrom," replied the doctor, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses, "the burns are extensive and deep. The process will be long and..." "Money is no object," Ted interrupted him. "That girl needs to walk normally again." Ben, who watched the scene from afar, couldn't hide his discontent. He approached Melissa, his girlfriend, who had just arrived from Chicago, and whispered, "See that? My dad never spent that much money on me when I broke my arm last year." Melissa, a young woman of 25 with more intelligence than her fiancé liked to admit, replied thoughtfully, "Don't you think it's strange? Your dad has always been known to be calculating. Why this sudden interest in the girls?" The question hung in the air, interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Maureen O'Malley, the investigative journalist. She was trying to interview the doctors when she was stopped by hospital security. "The people have a right to know," she argued. "Why so much secrecy surrounding the treatment of a girl who supposedly suffered a common household accident?" Her words caught the attention of Ashley, who was waiting in her wheelchair to be taken to the operating room. The teenager paled visibly, her hands squeezing the arms of the chair until her knuckles turned white. At that same moment at the farmer's market, Olivia was arranging her medicinal herbs when an unexpected customer appeared. Agatha. "Mrs. Olivia," began the housekeeper after making sure that no one was listening, "you worked at the mining company when Connie was a housekeeper there, didn't you?" The old herb seller stiffened, her wrinkled hands stopping in the middle of organizing a bunch of mint. "Why do you want to know that now, after so many years?" Agatha pulled the photograph out of her pocket, showing it carefully. Olivia adjusted, her old glasses, observing the image for long moments. When she spoke, her voice was only a whisper. "There are things that are better left buried, Agatha. Some truths are like poisonous snakes. When disturbed, they attack." "But the girls," Agatha insisted. "The girls," Olivia interrupted her, "may be the last chance for redemption for many people in this town, including your boss." At the hospital, Ashley's surgery had already lasted 4 hours. In the waiting room, Jenny had fallen asleep in Agatha's lap, still clinging to her doll. Ted paced back and forth, checking his gold watch obsessively. It was then that Norb appeared, his presence causing an immediate agitation in Jenny, who woke up startled. "It's him!" cried the girl, pointing to the watch on Norb's wrist, identical to Ted's. "The watch of the man in the dream." The silence that followed was deafening. Norb turned pale, while Ted looked alternately at his own watch and at his friend's. "They're the same," he murmured, an old memory beginning to emerge. "They were a gift from my father when we became partners. But why—" His words were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Almeida, still in his surgical scrubs. "The surgery was a success," he announced, "but we found something peculiar." "Peculiar?" Ted asked, his attention momentarily diverted from the incident with the watches. "The burns." The doctor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They have a very specific pattern there, not consistent with an accidental fire." The revelation fell like a bomb in the waiting room. Ben, who had remained quiet until then, let out a bitter laugh. "I knew it! This whole story is a sham." "Shut up!" Ted exploded, surprising everyone with his visceral reaction. "You don't know anything." But Ben's words had planted a seed of doubt. Why did Ashley's burns present a suspicious pattern? Why had Jenny reacted so strongly to Norb's watch? And why did Ted have the growing feeling that he was forgetting something crucial? The next morning, while Ashley recovered in the ICU, Jenny had a crying fit during breakfast at the mansion. "I want my mom," she sobbed. "Why did she leave? Why did she leave us?" Agatha was trying to comfort the girl when she noticed something strange, a suspicious movement in the garden. It was Maureen, photographing the house hidden behind the bushes. The journalist was quickly expelled by the security guards, but not before shouting, "The people deserve to know the truth about the disappearance of Connie Silver and about the contamination of the river." Her words provoked an unexpected reaction in Norb, who had arrived for a meeting with Ted. The man staggered, needing to lean against the nearest wall. "Are you all right?" asked Ted, genuinely concerned about his friend of so many years. Just a dizzy spell," replied Norb, but his eyes avoided Ted's. Later that same day, Agatha found Jenny in the old attic of the mansion, rummaging through dusty boxes. "What are you doing up here, child?" "Looking for memories," replied the little girl, with a wisdom beyond her years. "Mom used to say that sometimes we need to go back in time to understand the present." The housekeeper helped the girl down, but not before noticing something curious. One of the old boxes contained documents from the mining company, and among them, there was a folder marked as Clear Water Project, Confidential. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Ashley woke up from the anesthesia. Her first words, murmured in her semi-conscious state, made the nurse on duty pale. The watch. The man with the gold watch. He knew about the file. Mum tried to warn. The nurse immediately recorded the words in the chart, but before she could call the doctor, she was interrupted by Norb, who had appeared stealthily at the door of the room. "I'll take care of her now," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You can go rest." The nurse hesitated for a moment, but eventually left. In the hallway, she crossed paths with Ted, who was coming to visit Ashley. "Mr. Bergstrom," she called out, "I think you should know." The girl said something about a gold watch but her words were interrupted by a shrill scream coming from Ashley's room. When Ted ran inside, he found only Norb standing next to the empty bed, the gold watch shining on his wrist. "She had a nightmare," he explained quickly. "She ran off. I couldn't catch her." Ted looked at his friend, at the watch, and then at the open window of the room. An old memory began to form in his mind. A heated argument, important documents, a woman crying. Outside the hospital, a staggering figure dragged itself towards the garden, leaving a trail of blood on the ground. Ashley, with her freshly operated burns, was fleeing from something or someone that terrified her more than the physical pain she felt. The search for Ashley mobilized the entire hospital. Nurses, doctors, and security guards searched every corridor, every room, as night fell over the small town. Ted, his face etched with worry, personally coordinated the search, dividing teams and offering a reward to whoever found the girl. In the hospital garden, the drops of blood on the ground told a silent story. Head nurse Carmen, a 65-year-old woman with 30 years of experience, followed the trail with a flashlight. "She can't have gone far," she muttered, noting how the spots became more spaced out, not with the recent surgery stitches. It was Jenny who first had the idea. "The chapel!" she exclaimed suddenly, surprising everyone. "Mom always said the hospital chapel was the safest place in town." The small chapel, a modest building attached to the hospital, was seemingly empty when Ted and Agatha arrived with Jenny. The votive candles flickered gently, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It was then that they heard a muffled sob coming. From behind the altar, Ashley was huddled in the darkest corner, trembling violently. Her hospital gown was stained with blood, and the bandages on her leg showed signs that the stitches had given way. "Don't let him get me," she begged as Ted approached. "Please, don't let him get near me." "Who, honey?" asked Agatha gently, while Dr. Almeida, who had just arrived, began to examine the torn stitches. But Ashley just shook her head, tears streaming down her pale face, her eyes fixed on the gold watch on Ted's wrist. "The watch," she murmured. "Always the watch." At that moment, Jenny approached her sister, extending her inseparable rag doll. "Look, Ash," she said, using the affectionate nickname from childhood. Mom sewed a secret into her. The little girl's words caught everyone's attention. Ted watched curiously as Jenny showed a small opening in the seam of the doll's back. "Mom always sewed a secret pocket in the special dolls," explained the girl, "to keep treasures." With trembling hands, Ashley reached for the doll. Her fingers found something inside the small secret compartment, a USB drive. Ted's face paled at the sight of the object. A sudden memory hit him with the force of a train. Connie in his office, crying, showing him documents about the river contamination. "You need to do something," she had begged. "They're poisoning our town." "Mr. Bergstrom," Dr. Almeida's voice brought him back to the present. "We need to take Ashley back to the room. She's lost a lot of blood, and the stitches need to be redone. While the medical team prepared a gurney to transport Ashley, Norb appeared at the chapel door. His normally controlled face showed signs of agitation. "They found her, thank God!" he exclaimed, but there was something strange in his voice. His eyes fixed on the USB drive in Ashley's hand, and for a moment, a flicker of panic crossed his face. Jenny, upon seeing Norb, instinctively hid behind Agatha. The housekeeper noticed the movement and, for the first time, began to connect the dots. "Dr. Ted," she called discreetly, "I think we need to talk about something important. About a photograph I found." But her speech was interrupted by a shrill scream. Ashley, upon being placed on the gurney, had spotted Norb and panicked. "Don't let him get near me!" she screamed, trying to get up. "He was there! He was with Mom the day she—" Her words were cut short when the torn stitches caused a searing pain, causing her to faint. Dr. Almeida immediately ordered her to be taken to the emergency room. In the chaos that followed, no one noticed when the USB drive fell from Ashley's hand, rolling into a dark corner of the chapel. No one, except Norb, who discreetly moved towards the object. But Jenny, with the sharp perception of children, saw everything. Silently, while the adults focused on Ashley, she snuck to the corner and picked up the USB drive before Norb could reach it. Back at the mansion, hours later, Ted was in his office, Ashley's interrupted words echoing in his mind. Agatha knocked on the door, carrying a tray with tea and the old photograph she had found. "You need to see this," she said, placing the image on the table. Ted picked up the photograph with trembling hands. There he was, 15 years younger, next to Connie. But there was more. In the background of the image, partially visible, was Norb, and his face showed an expression that Ted had never noticed before, pure hatred directed at the smiling couple. "There's more," continued Agatha. "I found this in the attic earlier today." She placed on the table the folder marked as Clearwater Project, Confidential. Before they could open the folder, they heard a noise coming from Jenny's room. Upon arriving there, they found the girl sleeping restlessly, having another one of her nightmares. "No, no," she murmured in her sleep. "The man with the watch, he hurt Mom, threw dirty water on her." Ted felt his blood run cold. Dirty water. The Clearwater Project, the river contamination, all the pieces were beginning to fall into place. At that moment his phone rang. It was Maureen. "Dr. Bergstrom." The journalist's voice was tense. "I just received information that you need to know. About the day Connie disappeared, there's someone who saw everything." At the hospital, Ashley woke up slowly from the sedation. Her eyes met a figure sitting next to her bed. It was Olivia, the herb seller. "It's time, girl," said the elderly woman, holding Ashley's hand. "It's time to tell the whole truth about that night, about what you really saw when your mother confronted Norb, about the real reason for the fire." In the mansion garden, Jenny played with her doll under the watchful eye of Agatha. The girl hummed an old lullaby that her mother used to sing, but suddenly stopped, her eyes fixed on something beyond the walls of the property. "Aunt Agatha," she called out in a trembling voice, "why is Uncle Norb looking at us like that?" The housekeeper turned quickly. On the street, through the bars of the gate, Norb watched the scene with an indecipherable expression. On his wrist, the gold watch gleamed under the afternoon sun, like a silent omen of secrets about to be revealed. The town's annual Founders' Day festival was beginning to take over the streets. Colorful bunting decorated the clapboard facades. The smell of classic festival food filled the air, and the sound of music echoed through the streets. But inside the Bergstrom mansion, the tension was palpable. Ted had spent the night awake, poring over the Clearwater Project folder. The documents revealed a complex scheme to divert toxic waste from the mining company to areas near the aquifers that supplied the town's poorest neighborhood. "How didn't I notice this before?" he murmured, running his hands through his graying hair. The signatures on the documents were clear. Norb had authorized everything, using a power of attorney that Ted had granted him during a trip abroad. At the hospital, Ashley was finally beginning to open up to Olivia. The herb seller sat next to her bed every morning, bringing soothing teas and stories about the town. "My mom trusted you, didn't she?" asked Ashley that morning, her voice still weak after the stitch repair surgery. Olivia nodded, her wrinkled hands gently caressing the girl's hair. "Your mother was a brave woman, child. She found out what they were doing to our water and couldn't keep quiet." "Is that why she disappeared?" Ashley's voice trembled. "Because of what she found out?" The elderly woman hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Your mother discovered more than just the contamination. She found evidence of something much worse, something that involved embezzled money, bribes, and a plan to expand the mining into protected areas." At the mansion, Jenny played in the garden with her dolls when Ben approached. Ted's son had spent the last few days investigating on his own, hiring a private investigator to dig into the girl's past. "Hey, kiddo," he called out, his voice artificially sweet. "Want to see something interesting?" Jenny recoiled instinctively. Something about Ben's smile scared her. It was then that Agatha appeared, like a guardian angel. "Bath time, child," said the housekeeper firmly, casting a stern look at Ben. "And you should be more careful with your investigations. Certain people don't like having their past stirred up." Agatha's words carried a veiled warning that didn't go unnoticed by Ben. Later, in his room, he received a disturbing call from the detective he hired. "Mr. Ben," the investigator's voice was tense, "I found something about your father's past, something related to the girl's mother. But someone is trying to stop me from continuing. I received threats." "From whom?" Ben demanded. "I don't know, but—" The call was suddenly interrupted. In town, Maureen continued her own investigation. The journalist had discovered that on the day of Connie's disappearance, a municipal market employee had witnessed something disturbing. "It was late at night," reported Zelda, owner of a vegetable stand. "I saw Connie arguing with a man near the river. He wore a watch that shone in the dark. She had some papers in her hand, shouting about poisoned water." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Dr. Almeida made a disturbing discovery during the examination of Ashley's burns. "These marks," he explained to Ted, pointing to specific patterns on the girl's skin, "are consistent with splashes of some kind of chemical substance. Not just fire." The doctor's words provoked a new wave of memories in Ted. He remembered a tense meeting with Norb weeks before Connie's disappearance. "We need to get rid of these documents," Norb had said, holding a folder similar to the clear water project. "If this leaks, we're finished." In Jenny's room, the girl slept embraced by her doll when she began another one of her nightmares. But this time, the images were clearer. "Mom is in the big office," she murmured in her sleep. "The man with the watch is angry. There's another man too. He seems sad. There are papers on the table. Dirty water. Mom is crying." Agatha, who watched over the girl's sleep, recorded every word. The housekeeper had started her own diary, documenting all the girl's nightmares and strange behaviors. Something told her that every detail would be important. In the hospital chapel, Olivia lit a candle when she was surprised by Norb. "What are you telling the girl?" he asked, his voice seemingly casual but with a veiled threat. "Just stories of the town," replied the elderly woman without turning around. "About how our people have always known that the river is sacred. About how whoever contaminates it ends up paying the price." Norb gave a forced laugh, but his reflection in the window glass revealed his tension. "Be careful with those stories, Mrs. Olivia. Some people don't like local folklore." "And some people," she replied, finally turning around, "don't like it when their sins come to light." At the mansion, Ted received an unexpected visit. Melissa, Ben's girlfriend, brought surprising information. "Your son is obsessive," she revealed, nervous. "He hired people to investigate the girls, you, even your ex-wife. He thinks there's something big behind the disappearance of their mother." "And why are you telling me this?" asked Ted, suspicious. "Because," Melissa hesitated, "I found this in his apartment." She held out a manila envelope. Inside were old photos of the mining company, including one that showed Norb secretly talking to suspicious men near the river. In the hospital room, Ashley received a special visit. Jenny had insisted on bringing all her dolls to cheer up her sister. "Look, Ash," said the little girl, showing a particularly special doll. "Mom made this on the day she was in the big office. She was crying when she sewed it." Ashley took the doll carefully. Her fingers found something rigid inside the stuffing, another USB drive. In the hallway, Norb passed discreetly, his gold watch reflecting the fluorescent light. Inside the room, Ashley squeezed the USB drive tightly, silent tears streaming down her face. "You can't hurt us anymore," she whispered, as if speaking to someone absent. "I won't let you hurt anyone else." In town, the Founders' Day festival continued. Fireworks exploded in the sky, traditional masks danced through the streets, and the people celebrated. But beneath the festive surface, old secrets were beginning to emerge, as toxic as the contaminated water that ran silently under the feet of the revelers. Ted, watching the festival from his office window, couldn't stop thinking about the Clear Water Project folder. How had his best friend managed to hide something so serious for so long? And why did he have the growing feeling that the disappearance of Connie, the fire at the girls' house, and Ashley's chemical burns were pieces of a much larger and more sinister puzzle? His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was an unknown number. "Mr. Bergstrom," a familiar female voice spoke. On the other end, "This is the nurse from the night shift when Ashley ran away. There's something you need to know, something I heard Norb say when he thought he was alone in her room." The words that followed made Ted pale. In the garden, Jenny played innocently with her dolls, unaware that each of them might contain more secrets sewn into their entrails. And somewhere in town, protected by shadows and secrets, a woman watched everything from afar, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth that could change everything. The nurse's revelation left Ted stunned for the rest of the night. Her words echoed in his mind like a recurring nightmare. "I heard Mr. Norb on the phone saying that the girls' problem needed to be resolved permanently, as was done with their mother." The businessman spent hours in his office, reviewing every document, every memory of the past few years. How had he not noticed the signs before? How had his best friend and partner turned into someone capable of— No, he couldn't even complete the thought. The next morning, as the Founders' Day festival continued in the streets of the town, Agatha found Jenny in the garden, in a peculiar state. The girl had organized all her dolls in a circle and talked to them in whispers. "What are you doing, honey?" asked the housekeeper, approaching cautiously. "Telling secrets," replied Jenny with the typical innocence of her 6 years. "Mum said each doll holds a different secret. We have to listen carefully." Agatha sat next to the girl, observing the dolls more closely. There was something familiar in their embroidered faces, in their carefully sewn dresses. It was then that she noticed a detail that made her heart race. Each doll had a small symbol embroidered on the hem of the dress, the same symbol that appeared on the Clear Water Project. Documents. At the hospital, Ashley received a visit from Olivia. The herb seller brought with her a small fabric bundle. "Your mother asked me to keep this safe," she said, revealing an old sewing box. "She said that one day you would understand the meaning of the symbols." Ashley opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, she found threads, needles, and hidden in a secret compartment a notebook. The pages were filled with drawings, the same symbols as the dolls, and geographical coordinates. "Each symbol marks a location," explained Olivia in a low voice. "Places where your mother collected evidence of the contamination. She turned everything into a code, embroidered on the dolls she sold at the market." In town, Maureen continued her tireless investigation. The journalist had discovered that several people in the poorest part of town presented mysterious symptoms: skin problems, unexplained pains, spots on their teeth. All cases concentrated in areas close to the points marked in Connie's notebook. Ben, in turn, received disturbing news from his private investigator, who had finally returned the call. "Mr. Ben," the investigator's voice trembled. "I discovered something about Mr. Norb. He's not who everyone thinks. Before partnering with your father, he was involved in other cases of environmental contamination in other states. He used different names, but the modus operandi was the same. In the center of town, the Founders' Day festival reached its peak. The streets were filled with masked dancers, musicians, and street vendors. Among them, a figure caught the eye. A woman wearing a traditional festival mask, selling ragdolls. Jenny, who had convinced Agatha to take her to the festival, stopped suddenly upon seeing the vendor. "The way she is," murmured the girl, squeezing the housekeeper's hand. "It's like Mom." Before they could approach, however, Norb appeared. In the crowd, the vendor quickly disappeared among the revelers, leaving behind only a doll dropped on the ground. Ted, who watched everything from afar, noticed something strange in his partner's behavior. Norb seemed agitated, constantly checking his cell phone and looking over his shoulder. It was then that Melissa approached Ted discreetly. "Mr. Bergstrom," she whispered, "there's more to the photos I found. Look at this." She showed an enlarged image on her cell phone. One of the old photos revealed a crucial detail. On the day of Connie's disappearance, Norb wasn't alone. There were other men with him, all wearing the same model of gold watch. "They're executives from corporate headquarters," explained Melissa. Ben discovered that they're part of a larger group involved in illegal operations in several states. At the hospital, Ashley studied her mother's notebook when a different nurse entered the room, one she had never seen before. "Time for your medication," announced the woman, preparing a syringe. Ashley felt a chill run down her spine. Something was wrong. The smell. It was the same smell as the night of the fire. "No!" she screamed, knocking over the tray with the syringe. "Help!" Dr. Almeida, who was passing through the hallway, ran to the room. The fake nurse tried to flee, but was apprehended by security. In her bag, they found a false ID and a bottle with an unknown chemical substance. At the mansion, Agatha made a disturbing discovery while tidying Jenny's room. Under the girl's bed, she found dozens of drawings, all depicting the same scene: a woman arguing with a man near a river, a gold watch shining in the dark, and something being dumped into the water. The housekeeper ran to show the drawings to Ted, but found the office empty. On the table, only a hastily written note: "Agatha, take care of the girls. I think I finally understand everything. The truth was, before us all along, embroidered on Connie's dolls. Norb isn't alone in this story. If something happens to me, search the old abandoned factory. The original documents are there." Ted. In the hospital room, Ashley held her mother's notebook against her chest, silent tears running down her face. One page in particular caught her attention: a detailed map of the area, with an X marked in a specific location. The old abandoned factory. In town, the Founders' Day festival was coming to an end. The last fireworks exploded in the sky when Jenny, still in the square with Agatha, spotted the doll vendor again. This time, the woman briefly removed her mask, revealing a face that the girl would never forget. "Mom!" she screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the noise of the fireworks. Somewhere in town, Norb received an urgent call. "She's here," said a voice on the other end. "Connie is in town, and she's not alone." The man looked at his gold watch, a grim expression on his face. "Then we need to act now. Gather the others. Tonight we'll finish what we started 6 months ago." At the old abandoned factory, Ted found much more than he expected. The walls were covered with photos, documents and maps, all connected by red threads, a complete archive of evidence that Connie had meticulously gathered before her disappearance. And in the center of everything, a single rag doll, larger than the others, with a note attached to her hands. "If you're reading this, Ted, it means you've finally discovered the truth. I'm sorry for involving you in this, but I needed to protect our daughters. Yes, our daughters." The note fell from Ted's trembling hands, who needed to lean against the factory wall to keep his balance. Connie's words echoed in his mind, awakening long-buried memories. The craft fair 15 years ago, the secret meetings, the brief romance that blossomed during the month she worked at the mansion as a housekeeper. "How could I forget?" he murmured to himself, now recalling with crystal clarity the moments he had spent with Connie. She had left without explanation, and he, immersed in his obsession with work and power, never sought to know the real reason. At the mansion, Agatha faced a delicate situation. Ben had returned, more agitated than usual, demanding to see the documents in his father's office. "Where is he?" shouted the boy, rummaging through drawers. "Where's my dad?" "Mr. Ben." The housekeeper remained firm, protecting Jenny behind her. "Your father left to resolve important matters. I suggest you calm down." It was then that the phone rang. It was Melissa, her voice filled with urgency. "Agatha, don't let Ben leave the mansion. He discovered something terrible about Norb and is planning to confront him alone." At the hospital, Ashley received an unexpected visit. Olivia arrived, panting, carrying an old box. "Your mother asked me to keep this until the right moment," said the herb seller, revealing the contents. Dozens of small dolls, each containing a secret compartment with different evidence, photos, documents, recordings. "How did she get all this?" asked Ashley, admiring her mother's ingenuity. "Your mother was smarter than they imagined," replied Olivia with a sad smile. "While cleaning the offices, she collected evidence. Each doll tells a different part of the story. In town, the night after the Founders' Day festival brought an unsettling silence. Maureen, following an anonymous tip, was driving to the old factory when she noticed something strange. Several luxury cars parked nearby, all with the same sticker on the window, the symbol of the mining company. Inside the factory, Ted continued to discover more secrets. The walls were covered with an elaborate map of the area, marking all the points where toxic waste had been illegally dumped. Each location was connected to a different doll, each containing specific evidence. "She planned everything," he murmured, admiring Connie's meticulousness. A sudden noise made him hide behind an old machine. Voices approached. One of them, unmistakably, belonged to Norb. "We need to find all the dolls," he was saying to someone. "Connie hid the evidence inside them. If a single doll falls into the wrong hands, our whole scheme comes crashing down." "What about the girls?" asked another voice. "They may know something." "I've already taken care of that," replied Norb. "I sent someone to the hospital. Soon, Ashley will no longer be a problem." Ted's blood ran cold. He needed to warn someone, but his cell phone had no signal inside the factory. At the hospital, Dr. Almeida examined the contents of the bottle found with the fake nurse. "This is terrifying," he said to Ashley. "It's the same chemical component found in your burns. Someone wanted to make it look like your wounds had become infected." Jenny, who had convinced Agatha to bring her to visit her sister, was playing with her dolls in the hallway when she saw something that made her freeze. Through the hospital window, she observed several men wearing identical gold watches entering the building. "Aunt Agatha!" she called out in panic. "It's them! The men with the watches!" The housekeeper acted quickly, locking Ashley's room door and pushing a closet to block it. Outside, footsteps approached. In another part of town, Ben staggered. Through the streets, the effect of alcohol mixed with the anger he felt. The discoveries of the private detective had left him distraught. His father wasn't the villain, he thought. It was Norb who had manipulated everything from the beginning. "I need to fix this," he murmured, heading to the old factory. "I need to help my dad." At the mansion, now empty, the night wind made the curtains dance gently. In Jenny's room, her dolls were organized in a specific pattern, a pattern that, viewed from above, formed a perfect map of the town with the old factory at the center. Melissa, who had followed Ben discreetly, made a shocking discovery while checking the coordinates marked in Connie's notebook. They didn't only point to locations of contamination, but formed a code. When deciphered, it revealed a message. The truth is where it all began, in the heart of the old factory, where the first crime was committed. At the hospital, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. The men with the gold watches were already in the hallway, trying to break down the door. Inside the room, Ashley held her mother's notebook tightly, while Agatha desperately looked for a way out. It was then that Jenny had an idea. "The secret passages," she exclaimed. "Mom always said that old hospitals have secret passages for emergencies." Indeed, behind a heavy cabinet, they found an old door that led to an abandoned service corridor. At the factory, Ted watched in horror as more men arrived for the meeting with Norb. He recognized several of them, powerful executives, local politicians, all involved in the contamination scheme. "The plan is simple," explained Norb. "After we get rid of the evidence and the girls, we'll expand the operation. The new mining area is already guaranteed." It was then that a female voice cut through the darkness. "Not this time, Norb." Everyone turned around. There, at the entrance of the factory, was a woman that Ted would never forget. Connie, alive and determined, holding a last rag doll in her hands. "This," she said, her voice firm, "is the only doll you never found, the one that contains the final proof, the one that will end all of this." At the hospital, while Agatha guided the girls through the abandoned corridors, Ashley finally understood the true meaning of the symbols embroidered by her mother. "They're not just coordinates," she whispered. "They are instructions. Mom knew this would happen. She planned everything, every detail, every doll, every symbol. It was a plan to expose the truth and protect the town." Maureen, who had managed to enter the factory stealthily, began to transmit everything live through her cell phone. The truth that Connie had protected for so long would finally come to light. And in the center of everything, a last doll guarded the final secret, a secret that would forever change not only the fate of the town, but the lives of all involved in that intricate plot of power, greed, and redemption. The silence that followed Connie's appearance at the old factory was deafening. Ted, still hidden behind the old machine, could barely breathe. There she was, the woman who for years had inhabited a hazy corner of his memory, now standing tall, challenging Norb and his group of conspirators. "You should have stayed where you were," snarled Norb, his hand instinctively going to his gold watch. "You don't know what you're doing." "On the contrary," replied Connie, her voice calm but firm. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Every step, every doll, every symbol, everything was planned for this moment." At the hospital, Agatha led the girls through the abandoned corridors, the sound of doors being broken down echoing in the distance. Jenny clutched her favorite doll to her chest, while Ashley, supported by improvised crutches, consulted the symbols in her mother's notebook. "We need to get to the basement," whispered Ashley. "The symbols, they form a map of the old tunnels. that connect the historic buildings of the town." "How do you know that?" asked Agatha, amazed. "Mum taught me to read the symbols since I was little," replied the teenager. "She said one day I would understand why." On the street, Ben staggered towards the factory when he was intercepted by Melissa. "You can't go there like that," she pleaded. "They are dangerous." "My father's in there," he replied, his voice choked with emotion and alcohol. "I need to help him. I need to fix everything." "Then listen to me," said Melissa firmly. "I have a better plan." Inside the factory, the tension increased. Connie took a step forward, the doll in her hands shining under the dim light. "You thought it was enough to take me away, didn't you?" she continued. "You thought a mother would abandon her daughters without a good reason, greater good. Each day away from them was a day spent collecting more evidence, connecting more dots." "Enough!" shouted one of the executives. "Get her!" But before anyone could move, the factory lights suddenly turned on. Maureen, who was broadcasting everything live, had found the power panel. In the sudden glare, everyone saw what decorated the walls. Hundreds of photos, documents, maps, the entire criminal scheme exposed in meticulous detail. In the tunnels beneath the hospital, Agatha, Ashley, and Jenny advanced, guided by the dim light of a cell phone. The floor was damp, and the air had a strange smell. "This smell," murmured Ashley, stopping suddenly. "It's the same as the day of the fire." Jenny hugged her doll tighter. "The doll knows the way," she said with the innocence of her 6 years. "Mom always said they know all the secrets." It was then that Agatha noticed something peculiar on the doll's dress, a small map embroidered, almost imperceptible, showing exactly where they were. At the town's police station, Chief Frank Silvera, 55, received a flood of calls. Maureen's live broadcast had gone viral, and outraged citizens were beginning to gather in front of the old factory. Back at the factory, Norb tried to maintain control of the situation. "You don't understand," he said, his voice betraying desperation. "Progress has a price. Some people need to sacrifice themselves for the greater good." "What greater good?" Ted's voice thundered through the factory as he finally emerged from his hiding place. "Poisoning an entire town? Torturing an innocent family?" The surprise on Norb's face upon seeing his old friend and partner was quickly replaced by a calculating expression. "Ted, you shouldn't be here. Don't force me to—" "To what?" interrupted Connie. "To do to him the same thing you tried to do to me. The same that you did to so many others who discovered your crimes." In the tunnels, the girls and Agatha reached a fork. Jenny, following some childish instinct, pointed to the path on the right. "That way," she said with certainty. "That's where the heart beats strongest." Ashley consulted the symbols in the notebook. "She's right. This tunnel leads to the old factory." On the street, Melissa executed her plan. With the help of Olivia, who knew all the secrets of the old town, she had mobilized dozens of women, all buyers of Connie's dolls, all victims of the contaminated water. "Each of these dolls," explained Olivia to the assembled women, "contains a piece of the truth. Together, they tell the complete story of what they did to our town." One by one, the women began to open their dolls, revealing photos, documents, recordings, an arsenal of evidence carefully distributed by Connie over the years. Inside the factory, Norb began to lose control. His allies, seeing the crowd forming outside and the evidence on the walls, began to back away. "You're all cowards," he shouted, "after everything we built." "You didn't build anything," replied Ted, approaching Connie. You destroyed lives, you destroyed our town, you destroyed our friendship." It was then that a noise coming from the back of the factory caught everyone's attention. An old door opened, revealing Ashley and Jenny, followed by Agatha. "Mom!" The girl's cry echoed through the empty space of the factory. Norb, seeing his world collapsing, pulled out a gun. No one will ruin everything, no one! But before he could do anything, he was surprised by Ben, who emerged from behind him and knocked him down with a well-aimed blow. That's for manipulating. My dad, said the young man for the first time in his life, acting with courage and determination. Connie ran to hug her daughters, tears streaming freely down her face. Ted watched the scene, his heart torn between the joy of the reunion and the pain of the lost years. Why didn't you tell me? He asked softly to Connie. Why didn't you say they were? Because you needed to discover it for yourself, she replied. You needed to remember who you were before power and money corrupted your heart. Outside, the crowd grew. Maureen continued her broadcast, documenting every historical moment. The women with their dolls formed a circle around the factory, each holding a piece of the puzzle that Connie had created. And in the center of everything, a family began to reconnect, while an entire town discovered the truth that had been embroidered, sewn and hidden in the entrails of simple rag dolls. But there was still one last secret to be revealed. The doll that Connie held, the last and most important of all, guarded a truth that would change not only the fate of the town, but the very essence of all the relationships present there. A truth that she was about to reveal. As the first lights of morning began to illuminate the old town through the dusty windows of the factory. The dawn in town found the old factory surrounded by hundreds of people. Maureen's live broadcast had spread like wildfire, and residents from all corners of the town converged on the site, many bringing bottles of contaminated water as proof of the damage caused by the mining company. Dr. Almeida, who had left the hospital to accompany Ashley, began to organize a makeshift medical team to attend to people who presented symptoms. Inside the factory, Jenny played distractedly with her favorite doll, seemingly oblivious to the intense movement around her. But her watchful eyes didn't miss anything, especially the way her father. It was still strange to think of Ted that way constantly looked at the gold watch that had been seized from Norb. There's another one just like it, she said suddenly, causing everyone to turn in her direction. What did you say, honey? Asked Connie, approaching her daughter. On the day Mom left, continued the girl, her childish voice filled with a wisdom beyond her years. There was another man with the same watch. He was angry because Mom didn't want to sign a paper. Ted and Connie exchanged meaningful glances. Norb, who was being led out of the factory by the police, stopped abruptly. What is she talking about? Asked Chief Silvera, his professional interest piqued. It was Ashley who answered, her voice trembling slightly. The man with the other watch. He came to our house several times, always after dark. Olivia, who remained close to the girls like a silent guardian, withdrew a small bundle from her shawl. Maybe it's time to show this, she said, revealing an old photograph. In it, a group of men were seen in a meeting, all wearing identical gold watches. Connie found this photo on the day she discovered the whole truth. Maureen, who was still broadcasting live, brought her camera closer to the photograph. These men, she said, recognizing some faces, are executives from mining companies across the country. They form a kind of secret society. The Brotherhood of the Gold Watch, completed Connie. A group that controls not only mining, but also the fate of entire towns through the systematic contamination of natural resources. The revelation caused a murmur among those present. Ben, who had spent the last few months investigating Norb's past, felt a chill. That's what the detective discovered, he murmured. That's why he was so scared. Melissa, by his side, squeezed, his hand in support, and that's why he disappeared after trying to tell you. In the center of the factory, Jenny continued playing with her doll, but now her little hands worked on something specific. She was carefully undoing a seam on the toy's dress. Mom always said, she spoke as she worked, that the most important secret is in the heart of the most special doll. Everyone watched in silence as the little fingers, the girl's little hands, were pulling something from inside the doll. A small metallic chip. "It's a tracking device," explained Connie, taking the object. "I put it in Jenny's favorite doll because I knew she would never part with it. It was my way of always knowing where my daughters were, even when I couldn't be with them." Ted, who had approached to examine the device, paled upon recognizing it. "This chip, it's from our mining company, from the maximum security area." "Yes," confirmed Connie. "I took it the day I discovered the documents about the Clear Water project. But that wasn't all I found." She signaled to Olivia, who pulled an old notebook from her bag, the mining company's record book, dating back 15 years. "This diary," continued Connie, "contains the original records of all the Brotherhood meetings, including the meeting where they decided to start contaminating the town's water." Norb, who had not yet been taken away, let out a bitter laugh. "And you think that proves anything? We're more powerful than you imagine." "Maybe," replied Connie serenely, "but you made a crucial mistake. You underestimated the power of the women of this town." As if responding to an invisible signal, dozens of women entered the factory, each carrying her rag doll. Among them was Zelda, the coffee shop owner, who stepped forward. "Each of us has kept a piece of the story," she said. "Each doll contains different evidence. Some have photos, others have documents, some even have recordings." "A safety net," explained Olivia. "Connie created a network of guardians without anyone realizing it. Every woman who bought a doll, unknowingly, became part of something bigger." Ted looked admiringly at Connie, finally understanding the genius of her plan. She hadn't simply fled. She had created an entire system of protection and documentation, using the town's craft traditions as a disguise. Ashley, observing the scene from her wheelchair, began to open her notebook. "And there's more," she said, revealing pages and pages of detailed drawings. "Each symbol that Mom taught me to make represents a different location where they dumped the toxic waste." Chief Silvera immediately began to organize teams to check each location marked in Ashley's drawings. But Jenny, still fiddling with her doll, made another discovery. "Look!" she exclaimed, pulling a small flash drive from inside the toy. "There's a note too." Connie took the note with trembling hands. It was her own handwriting, written on the night she had to leave her daughters. "For when the time for truth comes, inside this drive is the recording of the last Brotherhood meeting where they planned to get rid of me. But more importantly than that is the proof that not all powerful men are bad. Ted, when you watch this, you will understand why I always believed that one day you would return to be the man I fell in love with." At the moment she finished reading, a new group of people entered the factory. They were the former employees of the mining company, led by Miguel, the company's oldest security guard. "We came to testify," he announced. "We all saw what was happening, but we were afraid. Not anymore." The morning progressed in town, and with it a new reality began to unfold. A reality where secrets kept in rag dolls finally came to light, where the power of money found its limit in the strength of popular unity, and where a family separated by greed began to reconnect through the truth. But there was still one last revelation to be made, one last secret kept in the heart of that story, a secret that Connie had kept not in a doll, but in her own heart during all those years. The commotion in front of the old factory increased every minute. Residents from all neighborhoods of town converged on the site, many bringing bottles with contaminated water, medical records, and photographs of relatives affected by pollution. Dr. Almeida organized a team of volunteer doctors who began to catalog each case, creating a detailed record of the damage caused to the health of the population. Inside the factory, Connie gathered everyone in a circle, the dozens of rag dolls arranged in the center as silent witnesses to the story she was about to tell. "Before I show the contents of this flash drive," she began, "you need to understand the whole story. Not just the environmental crimes, but the real reason why the Brotherhood of the Gold Watch wanted to silence me so badly." Ted, sitting between his daughters, felt his heart race. Something in Connie's tone suggested that the biggest revelation was yet to come. 15 years ago," she continued, "when I started working at the mansion as a housekeeper, I found something I shouldn't have. In the mining company's old files, records of another company which existed on the same site 50 years before. Olivia, who until then had remained silent, stepped forward with another old notebook. "The company belonged to Ted's father," she explained, "and it had a very different policy than the current one." "My father?" Ted frowned. "But he lost everything. The company went bankrupt." "No," interrupted Connie softly. "Your father didn't lose the company. It was taken from him." The revelation caused a murmur among those present. Ben, who had never met his grandfather, approached to hear better. "Your father, Anthony Bergstrom," continued Connie, "developed a revolutionary method of mining that didn't use toxic products. It was more expensive, but completely safe for the environment." "Impossible," contested one of the detained executives. "There's no such method." "There is," contradicted Olivia. "And I worked with him. Anthony was a man ahead of his time. He understood that true progress couldn't come at the expense of people's health." Ted felt his hands tremble. Memories of his childhood began to emerge. His father locked in the office night after night, heated discussions, men in suits visiting the house. "The Brotherhood of the Gold Watch," explained Connie, "emerged as a group of businessmen who opposed Anthony's methods. They knew that if his system proved viable, all other mining companies would be forced to adopt it." "So they destroyed my father," murmured Ted, the understanding finally hitting him. "But what does that have to do with you? With what's happening now?" Connie signaled to Jenny, who approached with her favorite doll. The girl removed from the inside of the toy a last object, an old key. "This key," said Connie, "opens a safe in the central bank of town. Inside it are all of your father's original research, Ted, or the development of the clean mining method." The impact of the revelation was immediate. The detained executives began to stir, while Norb paled visibly. "That's why you started working at the mansion," understood Ted. "You were looking for that research." "Not exactly," replied Connie. "I started working there because I needed the job. But when I found the old documents, when I understood what had happened, I realized I had a moral obligation to do something." Ashley, who had remained quiet until then, opened her notebook. On a specific page, there, among the symbols that marked the points of contamination, was a different drawing, the original design of Anthony Bergstrom's mining company. "I copied Grandpa's drawings without knowing," she said softly. "Mom taught me the symbols, saying they were part of our history." "And they are," confirmed Connie, "because the real story isn't about contamination or environmental crimes. It's about how a group of powerful men destroyed something that could have changed the mining industry forever." At that moment, Maureen, who continued her live broadcast, approached with a surprising discovery. "We found this in the newspaper archives," she said, showing an old photo. In it, Anthony Bergstrom appeared next to a young woman, Connie's mother. "Your mother," murmured Ted, recognizing the woman in the photo. "Was the chief chemist of the project," completed Connie. "She worked with your father in the development of the clean mining method. When the Brotherhood destroyed the project, she kept copies of all the research and passed everything on to you," concluded Ben, admired by the complexity of the story. "Yes," confirmed Connie. "She taught me everything, the symbols, the codes, the importance of preserving that knowledge. That's why I learned to make dolls. That's why I created this whole protection system. It wasn't just about exposing the crimes of the current mining company. It was about protecting something much bigger. Ted rose slowly, his legs unsteady. His whole world, everything he believed about his father, about his company, about his own role in that story, was being rewritten. "So when we fell in love," he began. "It was real," interrupted Connie. "Completely real. And when I found out I was pregnant with Jenny, I was even more sure that I needed to protect that legacy, not only for the past, but for the future." Olivia approached with a last doll, larger and more elaborate than the others. "This," she said, "was the first doll your mother made, Connie. Inside it is the key to understanding how all these years of struggle connect." As Connie carefully opened the doll, the morning sun illuminated the factory through the dusty windows, as if nature itself wanted to witness that moment of revelation. What they would find inside that last doll would not be just more proof or document. It would be the key to reconnecting the past to the present, to healing not only a contaminated river, but also hearts broken by decades of secrets and lies. And as Jenny snuggled in the lap of her newfound father, as Ashley held her mother's hand tightly, as the entire town held its breath watching that live broadcast, a new story began to be written, a story of redemption, of justice, and of a love strong enough to survive decades of separation. With trembling hands, Connie opened the last doll, the one that her mother had made so many years ago. The silence in the old factory was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of the crowd that continued to gather outside. From inside the doll, she removed a yellowed envelope and a small object wrapped in fabric. Upon unwrapping the fabric, everyone could see an old golden brooch with the original emblem of the Bergstrom Mining Company. "This brooch," explained Connie, her voice choked with emotion, "was the symbol that your father, Ted, gave only to the employees he trusted the most. My mother received it on the day they finalized the formula for the clean mining method." Ted took the brooch with reverence. He vaguely remembered seeing similar objects as a child, but his father had never explained their meaning. "Inside the envelope," continued Connie, "is something even more important." She took out several sheets of paper, some photographs, and an old flash drive. "These are the letters that your father wrote before leaving us," she said softly. "Letters that explain everything. How the Brotherhood pressured him, how they threatened his family, how he preferred to lose everything rather than compromise his principles." Silent tears streamed down Ted's face as he began to read the first letter. "My son, if you're reading this, it means that Maria's plan worked. Maria, Connie's mother, promised to keep these truths until the right moment came. I couldn't tell you any of this while I was alive because they threatened to harm you and your mother. I preferred that you saw me as a failure rather than put your lives at risk." Ben, who had approached his father, placed a hand on his shoulder in silent support. "But there's more," said Olivia, who was examining the contents of the envelope. "These photographs show all the original members of the Brotherhood, including my own father," completed Noor bitterly, "from where he was being detained. He was the one who created the Brotherhood, who planned everything from the beginning." Maureen, still broadcasting live, brought her camera closer to the old photographs. In them, one could clearly see the contrast between the two groups. On one side, Anthony Bergstrom and his team, all wearing the golden brooch. On the other, the men of the gold watches. Ashley, who had been studying her notebook of symbols, made a surprising discovery. "Mom," she called out, "the symbols you taught me, they're not just markings of contaminated locations, are they?" Connie smiled softly. "No, honey. They are the formulas of the clean mining process, encoded in a system that only our family knows. Each symbol represents a chemical element, a measure, a part of the process. That's why it was so important. That I learned all of them, understood the teenager. You were teaching me to preserve the work of Grandpa Anthony. Jenny, who was playing distractedly with the found brooch, suddenly let out an exclamation. Look, there's a secret here too. Her little hands had discovered that the brooch could be opened, revealing a tiny compartment containing a microchip. Dr. Almeida, who had returned to the factory after organizing medical care outside, quickly provided a laptop. When they inserted the chip, a series of files began to open. They were all the original data of the research, preserved intact for decades. Unbelievable, murmured Ted, observing the formulas and procedures developed by his father. All this time, all this knowledge. Preserved through ragdolls, embroidered symbols, and stories passed from mother to daughter, completed Connie. Because, sometimes, Ted, the greatest truths need to hide in the simplest places to survive. At that moment, something extraordinary began to happen outside the factory. The women who had bought Connie's dolls over the years began to sing an old work, Song of the Washerwomen of the town, which spoke about the strength of clean water and the importance of preserving traditions. The singing grew, echoing through the streets of the town, as more and more people joined the chorus. It was as if the entire town were awakening from a long sleep, reconnecting with its deepest roots. Melissa, who had stepped out briefly, returned. With surprising news, surprising news. Other towns are finding out, she exclaimed, showing her cell phone. The live broadcast has gone viral. People all over the country are sharing their own stories of contamination, their own struggles against irresponsible mining companies. Ben, who had spent so much time resenting his family's legacy, finally understood its true meaning. Dad, he said, his voice firm, we need to make this right. We need to take up Grandpa's work again. Ted nodded, tears still streaming down his face. Yes, son, but not alone. He turned to Connie. If you'll accept, I want you to lead this project. You and your mother kept this truth alive for all these years. No one better than you to help implement it. It was then that Olivia, who had slipped out quietly, returned to the factory accompanied by an elderly woman, Maria, Connie's mother, who had remained hidden all those years to protect the secrets she guarded. Finally, said the woman, her face etched with time, but her eyes shining with the same determination that her daughter had inherited, we can tell the last part of this story. And as the sun began to set over town, casting golden shadows through the windows of the old factory, a last revelation was about to be made, one that would not only complete the circle of this extraordinary story, but would pave the way for a new beginning, not only for that reunited family, but for an entire town that finally discovered the true meaning of strength, tradition, and love. Maria sat in an old factory chair, her frail figure contrasting with the strength that emanated from her gaze. Jenny immediately ran to the lap of the grandmother she had just met, while Ashley approached in her wheelchair, silent tears streaming down her face. "Grandma," whispered Ashley, "you've been alive all this time." "Yes, my dear," replied Maria, caressing her granddaughter's face. "I needed to stay hidden to protect all the secrets I guarded. But now, finally, I can tell the last part of this story." The elderly woman pulled a last object from her bag, a leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed with time, but perfectly preserved. "This," she said, "is Anthony Bergstrom's personal diary. He gave it to me on the night he decided to confront the Brotherhood, knowing that he might not survive his decision." Ted approached, his hands trembling as he touched his father's diary. Maria continued, "Anthony not only developed a clean mining method, he discovered something much bigger, something that the Brotherhood would do anything to keep secret." She opened the diary to a specific page where a detailed map showed the entire region around the town. "Under this town," explained Maria, "there is one of the largest aquifers. In the Midwest, pure, clean water enough to supply millions of people. The contamination that the mining company caused wasn't just a side effect of extraction. It was a deliberate strategy to render this natural resource useless and maintain control over the region. The revelation caused a collective shock. Maureen, still broadcasting live, brought her camera closer to the map in the diary. That's why they needed to silence Anthony so badly, understood Ted. It wasn't just about the clean mining method. It was about water, completed Connie, the most precious resource of the future. Maria nodded, continuing her revelation. Anthony discovered that it was possible not only to mine without contaminating, but also to preserve and even purify the aquifer during the process. It was a complete revolution in the mining sector. Norb, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke, and that's why he needed to be stopped. The power has always been in contamination, in the control of water resources. Ben, who had remained thoughtful, suddenly understood something. The dolls weren't just about keeping evidence of the crimes, they were about preserving the knowledge of how to save the water. Exactly, smiled Maria. Each doll that Connie made carried a piece of the puzzle. The symbols she taught Ashley, the stories she told Jenny. Everything was part of a larger plan to keep alive the true legacy of the Bergstrom. At that moment, Dr. Almeida returned to the factory. With urgent news, the tests of the people affected by the contamination, we found a pattern. The symptoms aren't just of common poisoning. There is evidence of systematic, planned contamination. They altered the composition of the waste, explained Maria. They added specific elements to maximize the damage to the aquifer. Each symbol that we embroidered on the dolls represented not only the location of the contamination, but also the specific type of toxin used. Olivia stepped forward, bringing all the dolls that had been collected, and each of these dolls also carries the formula to reverse a specific type of contamination. Anthony's method wasn't just preventive, it was curative. The understanding of the magnitude of that discovery hit everyone. It wasn't just about exposing environmental crimes or reconnecting a family. It was about saving an entire region, recovering a precious natural resource that had been deliberately attacked for decades. Ted stood up, his posture reflecting a new determination. We need to start immediately. We'll reopen the old factory, implement my father's method, start the decontamination process. It won't be easy, warned Maria. The Brotherhood has powerful connections. They will come with everything to stop us. It was then that Ben stepped forward, surprising everyone. They can't stop us anymore. Not when we have the truth on our side, and not when we have this. He raised his cell phone, showing something surprising. Maureen's live broadcast had gone viral. Millions of people across the country were watching that story unfold. Messages of support, offers of help, and similar reports from other regions flooded social media. "The people are with us," said Melissa, hugging Ben. "The truth is finally coming to light." Jenny, who had remained quiet in her grandmother's lap, suddenly stood up, carrying her favorite doll. "Mom always said that dolls keep dreams. Now they can keep hope too." Connie hugged her youngest daughter, looking with love at Ashley and then at Ted. "Yes, my love. And now we can finally be a complete family, united not only by blood, but by the purpose of continuing the work that your grandparents started." Outside the factory, the people of the town continued singing. The sound of united voices echoed through the old streets, carrying a message of hope and renewal. The women with their dolls formed a circle, symbolizing the union between past and present, between tradition and progress. Maria stood up, her small figure radiating an ancestral strength. Anthony always said that the true wealth of a land isn't in the gold that can be extracted from it, but in the water that gives life to its people. Today, finally, we can honor that teaching. And so, as the sun set over the town, a new era began, an era of healing, of reconnection, of justice. Ted, with his daughters and Connie by his side, watched the crowd outside, his heart overflowing with emotion. His father's legacy had not been lost. It had been preserved through the love of two families, the tireless work of courageous women, the innocence of a child who never stopped believing in the magic of rag dolls. The last light of the day illuminated the old factory, its golden rays reflecting in the hundreds of dolls that had guarded that truth for so long. And in each of them, embroidered with love and determination, was not only a secret or an accusation, but the promise of a better future. A future where the water would run clean again, where traditions would be honored, where a reunited family could finally heal its wounds and build something new, something as precious as the gold that slept under the soil of the town, as pure as the water that they now had the chance to recover. And in the little doll that Jenny still held, a last secret smiled. No longer a secret of pain or separation, but a secret of hope, of renewal, of a love strong enough to overcome decades of silence and finally bring the truth to light.